Hi, this was a case study conducted by Marine Cop David Woods and Ryan Gates. This is a case study concerning using instruments and online interactions of those instruments. The delivering instruction online has seen a marked increase in the last 5 to 10 years. While some subjects do lend themselves well to this online environment, some don't. For instance, science and math struggle with creating viable online instruments and interactions. These unique challenges for the science have recently started becoming documented and addressed by the science community. And in this case study, we discuss those challenges and interview an educator who has been involved with distance labs. We broke the case study into 2 parts, background reading and an interview. The background reading was assigned by our professors to help expedite the process. The interview was conducted by me, Ryan Gates, and it was Michael Lerner from Oregon State University. The next slide contains the questions, and the subsequent slides are the highlights from his answers. The responses are paraphrased in black, and then the red text is the concepts that link back to our background reading. Here are all the questions we came up with that we wanted to ask. We did not include all of the answers in the subsequent slides, but these are all the questions that we did ask. Which method do the students prefer? He gave an interesting answer that they did conduct polling that they compared the labs from virtual versus traditional, and they did find that it was pretty much even as to which they preferred, or they felt that either was comparable, the virtual versus traditional, but that the lacking part, the thing that was lacking for the virtual labs was the instant feedback from teachers, and this goes along with what the surveys conducted by Abu al-Halabi and Hamza found, that the students did have equal interest in completing both virtual and traditional labs, and that in the study's comments that they found that were negative were that it was centered on the lack of teacher-student interaction when using the virtual labs, and that some things came up that they weren't able to get instant feedback from their teachers, and therefore that's what was the most difficult part of taking virtual labs. Our online courses for eCampus students exclusively, or a mixture of on-campus or eCampus students, it varied depending on which class they were taking, which class they had signed up for. But generally, sorry, there's a typo there, but there are about 1,000 students that do both virtual and traditional labs at Oregon State. This was one of the more interesting questions that he answered. Do you find there are certain labs and concepts that are harder to teach virtually? There are specific lab topics that definitely are more difficult to teach virtually. For example, synthesis is a rough topic, and the whole topic of organic chemistry would just be very difficult to administer virtually. However, there are things that do lend itself well. But one of the other things that is difficult is outcomes, such as safety and technical skills are very hard to teach in a virtual environment. Those that are easier and better than traditional labs are state-of-the-art things that are top-of-the-line technology, because that lends itself well to virtual environment, such as chromatography and those kind of things. It's just harder to get done without state-of-the-art technology. One of the questions was online discussion boards, and if the students discuss the concepts they learned using virtual remote access labs. What they found is that discussion boards are not as significant for the labs, but is definitely a positive when used in the lecture portion of the class. However, there are certain student interactions and teacher interactions that are lacking in terms of the lab, but the more important part of that is not just discussing, but data sharing, and that's one thing that they have been trying out, is that completing labs with other people's data, and that is an important process in science community. And that this was discussed in the Kenenfial's and Shaw's work about distance learning, where there are three interactions always, and that's the student to teacher, student to content, and student to student interactions, and that for each interaction there's a give and take, and that a creation of a learning tool has to address each of these interactions, or at least understand that these three interactions occur and find a way of implementing those three. Although that doesn't always mean that the student-teacher interaction is instantaneous, or the student-student interaction is instantaneous in a virtual environment. One of the harder questions for him to answer was what criteria do you use in determining a virtual lab is acceptable or not. One of the things was that it's not a single person's decision, and it usually involves at least 3 experienced instructors. But the lab does also not only go through those 3 instructors, but that it is alpha and beta tested before being finalized. And even through all that process, there have been a couple instances where they have scrubbed labs once they got to the end. But the bottom line is that it has to be looked at by a lot of eyes in order for it to be a acceptable virtual lab. Here are resources that we used. There was a lot more to it, but we wanted to condense it down and give the highlights of this. So bottom line is that the virtual labs are all difficult to, not difficult, but have their unique challenges to create, and that this is one of the things that have just started, and that while it takes time, it's a worthwhile exercise to look at the challenges and to find outcomes that overcome those, or find ways to overcome those challenges.